Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Tuesday tip, where in this video I'm going to be talking about something that you don't really see a ton of people talking about, but is extremely important in the beginner's journey in learning how to ride BMX, and that is how to fall. Obviously, we don't ever want this to happen, but if you're learning how to ride BMX and you're trying new things on a BMX bike, it's going to happen. You're going to fall eventually. No one has ever ridden BMX for any extended period of time and just never fallen off their bike. So if you're a beginner and you want to learn how to ride BMX, learning how to fall is probably just as important as learning how to ride, because the more you progress, the harder the things that you're going to want to do are, and the more potential risk there is for crashing and the severity of those crashes. So let's get into some of the things that myself and my friend Sponge talked about in learning how to fall that actually don't have anything to do with just falling in general, but have everything to do with preventing the fall, being ready for the fall, and just falling in general, but not the actual technique of falling, because that is always different, and there's only one way to actually learn how to fall, and I think you might know what that one way is. So let's get into a few different points that can help you whenever you do end up falling to maybe lessen the severity of the fall and hopefully prevent injury using the things that we're about to talk about. The first of those is to just get comfortable on your bike. The more you ride your bike, the more comfortable you're going to get on it, and the more comfortable you get, the more at one you kind of feel with your bike, and the more at one you feel with your bike, the more you start to develop this presence of mind and kind of a feeling of where you're at and where the bike's at all times, and all of these things are vastly important to falling while you're riding your bike. Because if you're comfortable on your bike and you're not stiff, that means you have less focus on maintaining control of the bike because you're comfortable on it and you kind of have a sense and feel for where you're at and how to control things, and you're just kind of comfortable. And that means that you can put more of a focus on falling, or you can be more prepared for if something happens. It is huge to just ride your bike as much as possible, to get as comfortable on your bike as possible. And this is something that I've talked about in a lot of my how-to videos, is that you just want to get comfortable on your bike before you actually try some of these things, and being comfortable on the bike is a prerequisite to it. So this is kind of like the first step. You need to get comfortable on the bike and ride it just as much as you possibly can, so that it feels like an extension of your body and like you are at one with your bike, which is something that can take years and years and years to learn, but it does happen and you will notice it over time. So the next thing I want to talk about is more on this presence of mind subject, more on getting comfortable with your bike enough to where you have presence of mind to everything that's going on around you and where you are in relation to your bike. And learning this presence of mind is going to give you kind of a situational awareness while you're riding your bike, and you'll start to develop a sense of when and how to bail off of your bike, because there's certain situations where you might want to bail off of the bike and certain situations where you might not want to bail off of the bike. A perfect example of this is actually at the trails. So you've got a lip and you've got a landing. You're going off of the lip towards the landing. If you get completely out of whack on your bike, you definitely want to ditch the bike so that you can land on your feet on the top of that landing. But if you go off of a lip and you know that you're just going to be really short, but you're still rock solid on the bike, you're super comfortable on it, you feel at one with the bike, you might just hang on to the bike and not bail, and then land in 50-50 case the back of this dirt jump, kind of like this, and it be just fine because you had the presence of mind and the forethought to know that you didn't want to bail out in this scenario, and that just casing the backside of it is going to be okay. So the presence of mind while riding your bike to learn how and when to bail is very important as well, and the how to bail is also important. If you're way forward on the bike and the bike's way underneath you, you might want to just let it go underneath you so that it gets behind you and you get away from it. But if you're completely crooked and sideways, you might want to let it go to the side. Or situations where you're at the trails or you're doing anything and you need to bail and you can just feel the bike in a certain place because you have the presence of mind and just what to do in general whenever you're in one of these situations. And this is something that can almost only be learned from actually riding the bike and bailing and getting comfortable with your bike and becoming at one with your bike like we just talked about. You may be able to learn this in a foam pit, and maybe that is something that would be a good tip for any beginner, is to go somewhere that does have a foam pit and get used to jumping in the air and letting go of the bike in any direction that you need it to, because you're developing that fundamental skill of how to bail, how to fall, when to fall, and how to bail the bike out in any way that you might need it to. Because I can promise you, in all of the years that I've been riding BMX, I have had to bail in so many different scenarios in different ways, and learning how to do that at the trails has given me a new level of control that I would not have had otherwise. So I definitely recommend this foam pit trick, and going into the foam pit and just getting used to throwing the bike in all different directions away from you and landing away from it, because this is a very safe way to do that. And then after that comes a tip that I haven't really touched on whatsoever yet, and that is to be calculated. Being calculated is so important when you're riding your bike. And what I mean by being calculated is that you've learned the presence of mind that we talked about that came with the comfort of riding your bike, enough to kind of know where things are going to be and what's going to happen, so much so that when you're going to try a trick, for example, the ice pick on the sub rail that I'm trying right now on the screen, you can see that I'm not actually just full sending at this thing. I'm taking little practice jumps out of it and kind of dialing it in. That is kind of what I mean by being calculated, is that you're dialing in the things that you're trying before you fully commit and dedicate yourself to them. Now, I understand that there's certain things in BMX that you can't really dial in and calculate before you just send it. Big gaps, big rails, a lot of big stuff. But the way that you be calculated with these big things is by working your way up to them and doing smaller things. And that is another tip that we have to talk about, is working your way up to something. Don't just go out and do the biggest handrail you can find before you go and do a smaller handrail to get the feel for what it's actually like to jump on a handrail. Working your way up and being calculated in these things is how I feel that I've done so well for myself in injuries riding BMX. I try to always be calculated in what I'm doing. I'm never just fully sending something without being aware of what's going on or the situation or being prepared for it, or even working my way up to it. Just like this ice pick on the sub rail, flying out of it, getting prepared for a feel for it, getting an idea of the speed and what I need, so that whenever I actually go for it and try to get up on this rail, I know what's coming. I have a feel for it. I know how slow too slow is. I have an idea of how fast too fast is, and I can work my way in there and dial it in, just like we're talking about, to get it, nail it, and land it exactly the way I want to. So, working your way up and being calculated are one of the most important steps in this process, because when you work your way up and you're calculated, you're getting rid of some of the risk factors. You're getting rid of the unknown that could cause you to crash, and crash really hard. And if you haven't noticed yet, a lot of these tips don't really have anything to do with like how you do tricks or how you do any of these things. It's the thought process that goes into these things. You're getting comfortable. You're learning presence of mind. It's in your brain. You're working your way up and you're being calculated. It's all in your brain, and getting yourself to a point where you feel confident enough to just do these things after you've worked your way up to them. Look at people like Sean Burns. Sean Burns sends himself off roofs on a weekly basis, maybe even a daily basis. He does all of this because he's calculated. You think he's going into a roof drop blindly and just has no idea what's going on? He's like, oh, we're just going to jump off this roof and fly off and see what happens. No. I don't know Sean Burns personally. I haven't been with him while he's riding. But you can almost bet that someone who's been jumping off roofs for that long thinks long and hard about the situation and prepares himself. And he's worked his way up because he's done so many of these throughout the years that he's done smaller, bigger, 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 all the way through the range. So all of these things are super, super important to learning how to fall. The idea is that you prevent yourself from falling in the first place, or if you can't prevent yourself from falling, you are prepared for the fall when it happens. And that leads me to the most important thing that I'm going to talk about today, and that is knowing your limits. Nothing that I've talked about matters if you don't know your limits. If you're at this riding level and you ride way over your head up here, riding over your head is something you might have heard people say, and not to ride over your head. But if you are at this skill level and you try to ride up here, the chances are there's a lot more that could go wrong because you're still down here and you're trying something up here, and the chances are that something is going to go wrong when you're trying something way up here. Then if you work your way up and try these things that lead up to this point and prepare yourself for that, and the chances are when you do this, you're learning your limits throughout the process and getting to a point where you can ride up here and be confident that you can do it because you know your limits. There's a lot of people that I've seen get completely broke off and have to quit riding bikes forever because they didn't really know their limits while they were riding, or they didn't respect their limits. Maybe that's a better term for it. Respect your limits. I've seen a lot of people who didn't really respect their limits and then end up severely injured because of it, and then just have to stop riding altogether because of the severity of the injuries or the amount of the injuries and things just piling up to where they just couldn't do it anymore. And that is a really unfortunate side of things, and that's why I try to be so calculated and so precise and work my way up to things so much, because I want to ride my bike as long as I possibly can, and those things prepare me for situations when I'm trying something that might be pretty gnarly, to where I know that I'm going to be okay. I know my escape route. I know what I need to do if this happens or if that happens. I know where to throw my bike, how to get away from things whenever they go wrong. And all in this, I'm thinking about my limits. I'm not trying something that I have no idea whether or not I can do. I'm not trying a super insane giant kinked handrail and trying to ice pick down it because I haven't even done a giant double peg down a big kinked handrail yet. I work my way up because I know my limits and I respect my limits. The other aspect of knowing your limits that I wanted to hit on here is the fine line between commitment and hucking it. Hucking it is just going out there. It's like a whole nother level of sending it. Sending it can still be calculated and worked up to with commitment. Hucking it is just full out going for it. No idea if you have it or not, or whether or not it's within your limits. If you have the skills to pull it off, just going out there and full sending it. Larry and Tyser's just gonna send it silly. Kind of that mentality. Whereas commitment comes with confidence and presence of mind and just working your way up to something because you're committing to it fully. You know what's going on, you've worked your way up, you have the presence of mind, you're comfortable on your bike, so you're committing to something and not just hucking it. You don't want to be a hucker because there haven't been very many huckers in BMX, and I don't mean Mike Hucker Clark here. I mean people who huck it. There haven't been very many of those who have had a long BMX riding career. And the whole name of the game here is to ride as long as we possibly can. Or at least have the knowledge to know what you're getting into when you're getting into it, and not that you're going out there and full sending it and potentially breaking yourself off from riding your bike ever again whenever you're out hucking it. So with that being said, I'm sorry this was such a talking head video, but these are things that I firmly believe that beginners to BMX should at least hear about and be aware of when they go out and ride their bikes, so that they can do all of them and hopefully ride as long as they possibly can. Because that's all I want at the end of the day, as many people as possible riding as long in their lives as possible, at least to their free will and their choice. That's the idea. I hope it works for you guys. If this helped you at all, let me know in the comments down below. And if you're new here, hit the subscribe button while you're down there. I want to thank you guys for being here and watching, and hopefully we'll see you next time. Goodbye.